Was it a conscious decision or a momentary lapse of reason? How did progress take priority over humankind? Could harnessing the world's energy that allowed our ascent now be the linchpin of our downfall? Could it be we are connected to all things in the universe, not the center of it? That decisions in Washington affect the mountain glaciers of Peru? Deforestation in the Amazon affect the heat waves of Paris? That power plants in China affect air quality in Los Angeles? It's about facing what seem to be insurmountable challenges for what they really are, opportunities to reinvent and redesign. E squared, the economies of being environmentally conscious.
And time for the 7:20 weather report here this morning on 98 Country. For southern Minnesota, expect partly cloudy, windy conditions again here today. Our high right around 55 degrees. Those winds out of the northwest, 15 to 25 and gusty. And then tomorrow, expecting a partly cloudy sky, high of 57.
Small town America is literally dying on the vine because people are moving more to the city where there's economic opportunity. And out here we have farming and then the spin-off businesses from farming. And you see more and more abandoned farm places where what we're doing with wind energy is we're adding another cash crop that can put a fair amount of money back into our community. And once you put money back into the community like that, it rotates and revolves around several times before it leaves. I mean, the hardware store guy and the grocery store guy and the gas station guy, they all get a piece of the action.
The winds of southwest Minnesota have buffeted, cajoled, and embraced its rural inhabitants for years. Could they also save a small town way of life and at the same time address a global energy crisis?
We're talking about a resource that is now producing about 0.5% or less of the electricity in the United States, and a resource that has the potential to produce 1.5 times the entire US electricity demand. There's massive potential for this technology to scale in the United States. The more we see the advantages of it on an emotional, political, environmental, and economic level, you're gonna see it scale.
Wind energy is the fastest growing energy resource in the world. It started here in the US, but then we had about a decade of no energy policy at all. So all of the technology and all of the advances were coming out of Denmark and Germany.
The US is not only behind Europe in terms of its adoption of wind, it's behind Europe in terms of its production of wind turbines. I think there's a leadership position that Europe is taking in the wind industry as a producer, and there's an enthusiasm around wind in the communities as consumers.
What would it take for enthusiasm for wind to take hold in rural Minnesota? Ironically, the answer was nuclear waste. In 1994, lawmakers hotly debated whether to allow the state's largest utility to store more nuclear waste at its Prairie Island nuclear plant. They finally agreed to the storage if the utility invested in 550 megawatts of renewable energy. Minnesota's first large-scale investment in wind power was born.
In the past and currently, Minnesota gets a large majority of its energy from outside of Minnesota, and that gives us economic disadvantage, but it also puts us on an energy pathway towards the past. We want to be looking towards the future for a whole bunch of reasons, so that's why we're pushing renewable energy hard. We try, though, to promote what we call community-based wind energy, where farmers could have a value-added investment opportunity, or individuals or community members or cooperatives of those kinds of individuals could come together to own it. So it's not just large corporations coming in and taking over the industry like the oil industry.
Community wind energy is where there's local participation in the ownership of the wind projects, where there's small groups of farmers or local citizens that have pooled their funds and put together the wind project. They have a significant stake in how that energy is owned and operated. This is important because more of the economic benefits can stay local if there's local ownership.
We did some studies early on, and we started looking at this in more detail, thinking, well, what is the difference between community-owned wind and and out-of-country ownership. And the results of those studies were that it's someplace between 5 and 10 times the value for a community to own it. Because when we develop a project, we use local contractors as opposed to the others. They mobilize big companies in from somewhere, and they do the construction, and then they leave.
It's not just a large external corporate entity coming into an area and say, I know what you need right over here. You need 100 commercial scale wind turbines, and we'll have all of the Wall Street investors receive all the benefits, and you guys will get, 2% of the gross revenue.
We export about $75 million a year to foreign companies because they come in and they own these wind farms. And so community-based development was standing up and saying, wait a minute, there's another way to develop our natural resources where we can leverage this into long-term economic development and long-term economic viability for our rural communities, which really need it.
The place where Minnesota stands out head and shoulders above everyone else is with community wind and with the local entities owning these projects. More than 25% of the wind energy that's installed in Minnesota today is locally owned. This is a big deal.
This farm, Woodstock, I developed this in '98, and it came online in 1999, and it's 17 of the Vestas V44s. And from this little farm, we produce enough energy for about 3,500 homes a year. I was looking around for a spot to put a wind farm, and so I found this spot that we're on, and this is owned by the Koss family. And when I pulled into their yard and told them what I was thinking about doing, they thought I was a little bit crazy, but they were very amenable to the idea, and they thought it would be great. And I can remember Grandpa Koss just kind of going, yeah, sure, whatever you think. And it was pretty great. And they stuck with me. It took me quite a few years to get through the process at then, because I was literally the first privately owned wind farm that I knew of at that time.
When Dan started looking for land and land lease, it kind of wasn't accepted real well. 15, 18 years ago, people were looking at it, well, is it going to work? But then as it goes and it starts working, now everybody accepted it, see.
I pay them a portion of my land rent, and after a few years of operation, they came up and they said, boy, this works pretty good, doesn't it? I said, yeah, it works good. And so they said, do you think we can do this? And so I thought, I think we can do this. And so I endeavored to talk to the utility about a power contract for a small project, because they just wanted to do a couple machines. They just wanted to supplement and diversify their farm a little bit in this new cash crop. And so we completed the process on theirs, and we installed 2 Micon 750s for them. And that became part of their farming operation.
And they said it would never happen. A farmer would never get towers. It never happened. Well, it went on. It was 1 year, it was 2 years, 3 years. I still didn't get them, but finally we got them. Like I said to Dan, we can't quit now. We got to finish it because, hey, people said I can't do it, I got to do it. So I did it. Well, we got it done, I guess.
Dan Jewell had the knowledge about how to develop the wind project, and he leased their land, but he also shared the knowledge he had with them so that they could put a project together themselves. He would be the first to admit that there's nothing about community wind energy development that's easy. Nothing in this industry is standardized. Whether you want to buy 1 machine or 100 machines, it's very helpful to have somebody who's already developed a wind project or who knows the industry.
Well, now once the towers went up, well, then everybody wanted towers. But before that, they always look at you, it ain't going to happen, you won't get it, just for the big boys. But once I got it done, now everybody wants them.
I mean, people were lined up on the highway watching us put them up, and a couple of the neighbors that I had talked to were going, hey, are you going to do any more of this, and can you put them on our land? And it just kind of built from that. And then through that process, we learned how to aggregate farmers together into groups, which gives you buying power. And so instead of putting 2 over there and 2 over there and 2 over there, we get those same farmers and small business people together, and we build a larger project in one spot that allows us to take advantages of economies of scale.
I think in June of 2002, we signed on with Dan Jewell. We agreed to start kind of a feasibility type study with him, and he ran some numbers and did some wind study and kind of got the process started. We had a transmission line, which is good. We had a land base, which was good. He said we were close to the Windham Airport. That put up a red flag. So he says, before we get too excited, we're gonna scope that out. There was trouble there. So then only 4 of the towers could have ended up on Patty and my land. So at that point, we talked with Jim Harder. He's a neighbor a mile down the road. He had a large land base there with a hill on it too. And that's how Jim and Trent got involved. Then they each ended up with a tower out of that deal. And then the remaining 6 are friends and neighbors, and turned into be 12 towers.
Normally, if you've got a decent wind site and you've got power lines on it for a place to get rid of the crop and an interested buyer for the crop, you can get it done.
The 12 towers are all connected and go to our substation. And then from the substation, it's metered and sold into the Alliance power line. Okay, so all the energy produced from the 12 big towers is sold.
It's based off of what the utility charges us, and if they raise the cost of their price, then they raise the cost of the price that they buy from us as well.
Yep. So it's a neat little fit for us.
Yeah.
Our laws are geared towards cooperatives of individuals coming together to jointly own something. That's what we largely did with the ethanol industry. And we're trying to encourage that with some specific tax incentives in the wind energy production area as well.
We've done probably 130 megawatts of community-owned wind farms in the last few years, which is probably about $165, $170 million worth of economic activity. And we keep $13 million a year in the communities. And we've been able to figure out different models on how to do it, to get them financed and to get it done. I mean, to me, I think it's the greatest thing since the invention of the tractor for rural communities.
The best way to predict the future is to go invent it. And we got an environment here where people are in love with this and understand it and want to do it. And so it gives us public policy momentum.
Traditional power grids are set up around traditional power generation sites. With renewable energy and its intermittent power generation coming online in rural areas, the grid must be updated to keep up with the energy supply.
When we look at developing wind in places like southwestern Minnesota, that grid network was developed much more sparsely and with much less voltage capability and transferability in mind. And now seeing southwestern Minnesota and North and South Dakota as potential generating sites, that grid is going to have to be beefed up to allow all of that power to get to the load centers like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and hopefully places like Milwaukee, Chicago, and further points east in the future. We are truly on the frontier here, and the challenge of standardizing those contracts and ensuring that they have the lowest cost financing, ensuring the parts and maintenance are delivered when they're required is something that we're all still working to refine.
One of these machines, just one commercial scale machine, costs upwards of $2 million. So you need a return on investment. And right now, in this country, just the sale of electrons is not enough.
The federal government has what's called the Federal Production Tax Credit. It's very difficult for farmers and small business people to utilize that credit because of the rules, and it's subject to passive rules and alternative minimum tax rules. And so in most cases, what we do is we partner the farmers up with an equity partner who can utilize those tax credits to the extent that the farmer can't. And so the farmer basically makes money off of a small percentage of the total ownership of the project for the first 10 years. Plus he gets paid a management fee to manage the project for the first 10 years. And then after that, the ownership structure flips back to the farmer where he ends up owning the machines at the end of the project.
So we took out a loan for our portion of it, and then Equity Player came up with the rest of the money, and Basically, they're getting their payoff back in the tax credits. And hopefully after 10 years, it flips out and they turn into the 1%, we turn into the 99.
They've been up now just a little over a year, and we'll have our full investment already back from them. So it has been a good investment opportunity for us.
With wind energy, what you see is what you get. Some people are saying, not in my backyard, about looking at those wind turbines and having them be on the landscape. But if you know where your energy comes from, then you have a different perspective on how you use that energy.
We kind of akin it to hog farming. You know, some people say, wow, that smells, and other people say, oh, that smells like money to me. And that's because they have an economic interest in it. And we're seeing that in community-based development, people look at windmills a whole different way if they have an economic interest in it.
Well, one aspect of the renewable energy debate is the promise and hope it brings back to rural America through the chance to get economic development and capital investment back into areas that, you know, are having demographic decline, job-based decline, tax-based decline. And obviously people aren't going to stay in parts of our country unless they have access to a job or economic opportunity. So we have to find other ways to keep people economically invested in rural America, and renewable energy is a great way to do that.
That economic interest especially pertains to the large number of young people who feel they must leave rural America for better opportunities in the city. Community-based wind power is creating an economically viable future for the next generation. Dan Jewell is happy that the next generation includes his son, Tyler.
Yeah, she got so hot. Look at her. I mean, look at, she's bubbling. Yeah, we'll have to go up there and push that centrifugal back in.
If these projects are locally owned, more often than not, there's local labor that is maintaining these machines. It's a desirable job, it's a skilled job, and it's well-paying.
My favorite part is probably the scenery once you get up here, and also it's a very fulfilling job. I mean, you're working on a machine that creates energy, clean, green energy produced for the masses. I mean, just it's a great feeling doing something that good. And with community-based energy, it all stays here. And that's all that matters. And if each state can do that and have their own resource and have their own income stream through wind or solar or whatever it is, that's a huge plus for the state. Online, making bacon.
Some of the turbines we've been using from Suzlon, we convinced them that that they could build a blade factory here. And Tulsi Tanti, the chairman, and I talked about it, and he said, well, if you can get the state and the communities involved in this ownership model, which will drive the development, then we'll bring a factory here. And so we did, and they did. And right now in Pipestone, there's a factory building rotor blades, employs 300 people, which is a lot for a small community like Pipestone.
The plan is configured to make the blades for the 2.1 S88 machine, and that's the largest machine that Suzlon presently makes. The plant has 3 production lines, and our target is to make a set of blades per day, 900 blades a year, or 300 sets. And we plan to double the output of this plant within 3 years. So in 2010, we plan to double the output. So the demand locally is still greater than the capacity of this plant.
We run 7 days a week, 24 hours, 7 days a week. So to facilitate our 7-day schedule, we have about 320 blade team members on the floor. You know, this is a rural area. This is big stuff to these folks. Suzlon's very good at vertical integration, so we own most of the companies that make the generators and the towers and those types of things. This is the start. Rotor blades are difficult to ship, so this is the first thing we're going to do here. Will it be the last thing? Absolutely not.
We've advertised the positions as a career opportunity. We talk about having future generations of blade builders here locally. And it's nice to see young people get involved in the industry versus working in service jobs, something they can really sink their teeth into. This area has a possibility to be a composite technology center. And possibly in the future, we'll have suppliers here locally of the products that we use.
How could a wind enthusiast and a group of farmers bring an international high-tech manufacturing plant to southwest Minnesota? Where was the federal government?
In the absence of federal leadership on renewable energy, in the absence of a federal mandate to produce a certain percentage of U.S. electricity from renewable resources, you're seeing a groundswell of political support on a state level for renewable energy production. And states are actually incentivizing communities to develop more renewable energy. And there's certainly a political movement at a local level. And communities are up in arms, cities are up in arms, states are up in arms, and they're coming up with solutions.
You know, I've heard many times over the years, utilities go, well, if you didn't have subsidies for that wind power, it wouldn't really be working. Well, if we didn't heavily subsidize coal and nuclear energy, that wouldn't be working either. And so if I had my druthers, I'd like to eliminate all energy subsidies and then see what market wins. But that's not reality in today's world.
Well, the great news here is the country has reached a tipping point on energy, and I wish we would have done it 30 years ago, but I'm glad that we at least have done it now. The public is way ahead of the politicians on this stuff. I'm glad that we're now finally scrambling to dramatically catch up. Ideally, the federal government would be moving and leading in this area more dramatically. They haven't been doing that, so it falls to the states. And we're glad to do it. That's one of the reasons we have states, is to be the laboratories of democracy, to be innovators. We can move a little quicker, a little more nimbly than the federal government, and hopefully they'll follow our lead, and we'll see Congress follow us in this regard, or at least help us.
William Arthur Ward once said, "The pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change. The realist adjusts the sails." For the people of southwest Minnesota, being the realist just meant being open to a new way of doing things, and in turn, showing us the way.
The crops in Faribault County are in pretty good shape. The windy conditions this spring has created some problems for those wanting to spray their crops.
I'll tell you, I hated wind. It blows your hat off. It blows the seed corn bags across the field. You can't spray. It's too windy to spray. But I like the wind now. Yeah.
I think obviously we all want to do everything we can to produce domestically produced energy. And I think that's what's, driving a lot of the politics of today, is everybody's starting to realize, boy, we need to get our arms around this or we're in trouble. I mean, to me, energy is the Achilles heel of the United States of America. And if we don't get ourselves figured out on how we can control that and deal with it on a long-term basis, what are we leaving our kids besides a polluted mess?
I think communities in America right now are wanting to rally around patriotic solutions and wanting to find a way to solve both our geopolitical problems, our environmental problems, and our economic problems all at once. Communities are seeing a solution that they can all rally around together, that they can all say, we're doing something good for the country, and they can say, we're creating a source of income for our community. All at once. I mean, it's a win-win-win-win.
Community wind is the trifecta of renewable energy. You get clean, sustainable energy, you get economic development and economic viability for the rural communities that the projects are in, and you get long-term low-cost energy, because the cost of energy with wind power is the cost of capital to put the machine in the ground. And so our communities will have long-term cheap energy. The 70s, we had the philosophical mindset to do it. We didn't have the technical wherewithal to do it. Now we've developed the technical wherewithal, and the philosophy is coming back again. And so this time I think it's going to take it over the top. When you have the philosophical drive and the technical ability, that's when things happen.
For more information about E Squared, visit our website at pbs.org.
To order E², call PBS Home Video at 1-800-PLAY-PBS.